last week I shared that I've been thinking a lot about how we talk about mental health in the workplace and how being a mom of twins while running this podcast really opened my eyes. I shared with you that I hit a wall trying to juggle the demands of motherhood, working, keeping up with recordings, and maintaining that work-life balance that I am literally always preaching about. And between the responsibilities of being a working mom and my packed days, my focus was just super scattered. My sleep, frankly, wasn't really great, and I really just felt like I was getting by. And that experience led me to discover this concept of mental wealth, which I shared has completely shifted how I think about workplace wellness. And instead of just managing mental health reactively, mental wealth is about proactively investing in your mental resilience. Think of it as building a mental savings account that you can draw from when work gets challenging. I've been exploring different tools and habits that support this mental wealth building, and I recently discovered something that's become a game changer in my daily routine. Magic Mind reached out and sent me their mental performance shots and sleep elixir to try, and what caught my attention was how they align with the 5 pillars of mental wealth: sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and what they call exogenous compounds. Basically, the supplemental tools that help optimize your mental state. So here's what's fascinating. They've created this 24-hour approach to mental performance. The daytime shot helps with focus and clarity, and I've been using this for my morning podcast recordings, and I've noticed that I am much sharper and much more present in my interviews. And then their sleep elixir helps you wind down and get better rest, which we know is crucial for making good decisions, especially in HR. And I should mention, I only take vitamins. I'm not someone who generally relies on or frankly even believes in other kinds of supplements, but Magic Mind has actually made an impact on me. And in fact, I didn't agree to working with them until I had the opportunity to truly test its efficacy. And I've done that. And plus, Magic Mind is vegan friendly. So for someone like me who keeps kosher, this was really important. And what I appreciate is that they're not positioning this as some miracle cure. It's one piece of a larger mental wealth strategy. The formula includes time-released caffeine to avoid that dreaded afternoon crash, and they've added specific herbs for stress reduction, which is honestly something we could all use more of in HR. Plus, it doesn't replace your regular caffeine routine, thank goodness, so I drink the mental performance shot alongside my morning coffee. And for my listeners who also want to invest in their mental wealth this January, Magic Mind is offering an exclusive 45% off their new bundle pack, both the focus and sleep shots together. Just go to magicmind.com/humanhrjan. That's magicmind.com/humanhrjan for 45% off your first bundle. Make 2025 the year you truly invest in your mental resilience. Your team and your career will thank you for it. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. And what you're listening to this when it's already 2025 and we are recording in 2024, which means that we are total time travelers, which is so exciting. I will say I'm going to just preface by saying I do have a cold, and so if everyone's thinking, why does Traci sound so weird? It's because I do. So just bear with me. But luckily, I won't be the only one speaking to you today, and we have the pleasure of having Antoni Tsavelas on as a guest. I'm going to tell you a bit more about Antoni, and then we're going to jump right into some amazing information and content for this week's episode. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about Antoni. After successfully navigating the vibrant fields of fashion design, systems engineering, cloud training, and team coaching, Antoni Tsavelas found his true vocation, igniting the spark of inspiration in others as a public speaker and leadership coach. With a focus on spreading the potent messages of happiness and empowerment, his mission is to illuminate paths of personal and professional fulfillment for others. Global engagements have seen him gracing stages at many conferences around the world. Such appearances are complemented by participation in countless community meetups where he has imparted his knowledge and insights, furthering an understanding of leadership, happiness, and empowerment. Antoni guides individuals to prioritize their happiness in every aspect of their lives by offering straightforward,
impactful strategies through keynote speeches, coaching, and workshops. He empowers people to unlock their full potential. This is not just his career, it's his mission to help make the world a more inspired and joyful place. So, Antoni, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Traci. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Likewise. And you really do put a smile on my face, which I know is a big part of your mission, as I've just read. But
Yes.
before we talk all about happiness, even though it's inevitable because of what you do, why don't you kick us off by telling us a bit more about your career transformation and journey? Because what I read in the bio showcases a lot of skills
Yeah.
and backgrounds that you possess.
Yeah. So happiness wasn't necessarily when I talk about happiness, I talk about the what they call eudaimonic happiness, which is the inner happiness, not the happiness where you give somebody an ice cream cone and then half an hour later they're, distraught again.
Right.
So doing with that in mind, looking back into my career journey, I actually started off as a fashion designer. And I was a fashion designer for a good chunk of a decade. And what happened was the industry imploded here in Canada. And I was left for broke to feed my family, and I didn't know what to do. So I had some friends in tech that told me how much money they were making. So naturally I was like, well, this might be a great way to feed my family. So so I jumped into tech. I became a systems administrator for approximately 9 years. I jumped into cloud engineering, and then DevOps engineering, and then eventually a cloud trainer. And when I became a cloud trainer, I I ended up wanting to jump back into the people side of things. And that's when I discovered coaching, and I started to be a team coach. But during my team coaching, something very interesting happened. And that is, a leader had asked me, Antoni, how is it that you're always so happy? What is your secret? And I didn't know what to tell him. I really didn't have an answer. So I started to reflect on what is my recipe for happiness, so to speak. And I started to look at how I could even think about something like that. And if I could come up with a recipe for happiness, how could I share that with others so that way they can experience exactly what I'm experiencing every single day that I go into work? Because
Mm,
I always look at the positive side. I always look at, how can we make things better at work? And I think you can agree, Traci, that when we show up happier at work, other people take on that same mindset. They take on that same
definitely.
emotion, that behavior.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started to do that, I started to develop areas where I found that people were focusing on that really drove and fostered happiness. And this is where I came up with my own framework, which
That's
is
amazing.
what I call the happiness blueprint. Because naturally, you know, the same thing that makes me happy doesn't necessarily make other people happy. So each person has their own framework, their own recipe for happiness that they can follow in order to foster more happiness, not just in their home life, but in their work life as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one of the thoughts that I had, even though I already knew this background, your background, when it just dawned on me that you've made a business out of something that really comes naturally to you, which is something we all should hopefully be able to do one day. It's like I think about how I started this podcast. It's like, yeah, like this is what I do every day. And for you, you're like, you really figured out how to help people tap into the skills that they have and tap into a way of thinking that can enable them, can empower them, can empower the teams that work for them. I mean, it's pretty cool. I don't know why I didn't think about that before. I'm like, you made a whole business
Yeah.
out of
So
your being yourself. And that's
there's
amazing.
actually a story behind that, Tracy. So
Uh-huh.
when I decided to become a keynote speaker, something had happened, and that was a few months before that, my mother had passed away. And so I spent a lot of
Mm.
time reflecting on the learnings that she left me, because naturally we want to share the learnings from, the people that we love the most to
Mhm.
others. And what I found was what was hidden underneath was my purpose. And that was spreading that happiness, that positivity and gratitude. So when I was growing up, my father was very abusive.
Mm.
And how I was able to navigate that was my mother gave me these tools to navigate that chaotic time. And so every day she was telling me, like a mantra, Antoni, you got to be happy about what it is that you do. You got to be grateful for what you have that others do not. And you have to be positive in the face of adversity. And you can get
Mhm.
through this. And she didn't really know about the abuse, but these tools helped me navigate these chaotic times through my career changes, through tough times when I was broke, and even through navigating corporate culture, as we all
Mm.
know is pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
So when I learned about these tools, when I unveiled these tools, I realized that this was my mother's legacy and that I needed to share these tools with others and give them a way for them to action it. And that's where the happiness blueprint just made so much sense.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing so openly
Of
what
course.
you experienced as you were growing up, and also what inspired you to really dig deep and figure out what, emboldens you and keeps you going every day.
Yeah.
And I hope in some ways that there isn't relatability to your story, but I know realistically there probably is. And someone out there listening is going to feel represented by you sharing your experiences, and hopefully will feel your mom's essence coming through, in that you have to be positive and you have
Yeah.
to keep going and keep looking forward and ahead. And that's amazing. And when I think about even uh kind of relating this to the corporate culture side of things, as you mentioned, there can be a lot of chaos, and chaos is extremely unsettling, like extremely. And whether it's in our personal lives or in our professional, when there's that sense or feeling of being unsettled, all it does is breed more dissatisfaction, more toxicity, more concern, more culture issues. And so it behooves us, as my mom likes to say, it behooves us to make company cultures and corporate cultures much more positive and much less chaotic, or at least, if they are chaotic, enabling people to really be able to navigate that chaos. So
Yeah.
I guess with that, when we think about your blueprint to kind of navigate it a little bit, where do you start with it? Like, what does the happiness blueprint look like for someone who begins using it?
Yeah. So over time, I have found that there are 6 elements that allow people to foster more happiness in what it is that they do. And those 6 elements are inspiration, mindset, empowerment, alliance, care, and transformation. So, in inspiration, we're looking at goals. What are we doing towards building and challenging ourselves towards those goals? And when we achieve them, are we taking the time to celebrate them? So that way
Mm,
we can get motivation to create more goals, right? The next one is mindset. And we're talking about positive communication. We're talking about embracing change. So no longer are we looking at things like, oh, well, that's the way that we've always done it. Well, I'm sure you've heard that a couple of times.
Too many to count.
Yeah. So embracing that change, and then empowerment, we're looking at creating a learning mindset. We're looking at empowering others by understanding our own strengths, what we're good at, and why we're not doubling down on it. Because we can't be good at everything. So why not double down on our strengths and leave the rest to others, something that they're good at, or maybe build new strengths, right? Alliance, we're talking about relationships. So I firmly believe that this is a huge part of happiness. There's been so many studies. The latest study from Harvard, it was the longest running study on happiness, is that the quality of your relationships matter. And who doesn't love a work bestie, right? You get to work and you're like, hey, you'll never guess what happened over the weekend, right? You have that work bestie where you love to chat with them, and over time it doesn't just become a personal relationship, it becomes both a personal and work relationship. Because we spend a third of our time at work, why the heck are we going to show up to just do work? And for those of you listening, I'm doing that in air quotes. Nobody just wants to show up to just do work. Sure, we want to do our work, we want to be fulfilled, but at the same time, we want to do it with people that we enjoy doing it with.
Right.
Okay, moving on into care. So care, we're talking about the all-time buzzword, psychological safety, right? We want to feel safe enough to talk about the things that matter, to be empathetic with others. There's times where people show up with that toxic positivity. Oh, don't worry about it, Traci. There's a brighter side to this. No, people need to be empathetic and take into consideration other people's feelings, right?
Yeah.
And this way it opens up the space to not only people voicing their opinions, but it opens up the space for innovation, because now we can fail, and we can fail with grace, right? And finally, transformation is all about measuring and iterating. So we all love to measure things that, where we can do better. And this actually ties into feedback. So instead of expecting feedback, you should always solicit feedback to say, what did I do good? What can I work on and do better on? And then iterate on it. And so putting this all together, you see where you're concentrating on, where your focus is. And although focus may be bigger in one area and smaller in others, it doesn't mean that you're doing bad. It just means that your focus is somewhere else. So now you can see, where are my gaps? So if I'm not building relationships at work, maybe alliance is something that I need to look into. Or if I'm using negative phrases like, oh, well, if so-and-so gets hit by a bus, I'm sure you've heard that a few times. Yeah. So taking out that negative mindset can now bring us space for more positive mindset. So once you start noticing the gaps, that's where you can start taking action or creating action steps to improve, to bring more happiness and bring more eudaimonic happiness, and feel fulfilled that you're actually doing good and you want to show up to work, and Mondays are no longer mundane.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a great point. First of all, I love that there are different ways to look at this. And you kind of talked about it in the sense that if you've noticed a gap in your own experience at work, that can help you obviously, you meaning generally, that can help someone, that can help one to basically figure out where they need to spend more time and focus and energy and attention. And two of the I guess words that stood out to me were alliance and care. Alliance to me is probably the biggest thing that I put emphasis on every day, is this, sense of needing to build trusting relationships in the workplace, especially because it's those trusting relationships that help someone navigate difficult situations. It helps them navigate their careers. It helps them grow. It helps them develop, change, whatever it might be. And I think one of the things that continues to be a thread throughout all of my episodes is this emphasis on building really strong, trusting relationships. Because someone could
Yeah,
have a lot of relationships in the workplace, they might not all be trusting. So I always like to
true.
say trusting relationships. You don't want to have empty ones. So I love that alliance is one of those key monikers. And care, you said it, it's a buzzword or buzz phrase, psychological safety. It's true.
Yeah,
But I love, love, love that you brought it back to innovation, because, and that feeling of being able to make mistakes, because this, I feel like this is probably going to be my theme for 2025, because I've been
ooh.
talking about it a lot. I know, you heard it here first. I I recently did a presentation for a women's networking group, and I talked about how building a culture of innovation inspires and fosters deeper employee engagement and drives business results without you even having to think about it. Because at
Yeah,
the end of the day, and it's very, very much on the nose with what you've said and what you've shared from your happiness blueprint, that when people feel safe enough to make mistakes and even fail, that's where progress happens. That's where
yeah.
innovation pulls through. And it's funny because I don't know if you feel this way. You probably think about this way more than I do. I sometimes I'm like, if someone asked me for an example on from when I failed at something, it would be kind of hard for me to find something, not because I've never failed, because obviously everyone fails at something, but because
For sure.
I because I've never like really spent a ton of time thinking about my failures. And when I really like confront that within myself, I'm like, I kind of feel like that's because I don't allow myself to fail, but actually failing is a really important part of
Absolutely.
success, right? I
Actually,
don't know, it's
if you don't
yeah,
mind, Tracy, I want to take
please.
this moment to focus on that just for 1 second. Now, there's an exercise that I love to do with others, and that is to write out a failure resume. So, going through all of your jobs, your past history, and writing down the failures that you had in
Mhm.
those jobs. And when you start sharing those as a team, you see how ridiculous it is because everyone has failed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you do that, even with yourself, then you can start to see the positive side. You can start to see, what did I learn from that? Oh my God, that's how I got to this area. That's how I got to this place.
I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna write my failure resume, and maybe by the time this is out, I'll be able to post it on Instagram or something. Like, here are all the times I failed. It's so important. Like, let's be like even more on the nose about this. Like, the one of the things that sticks out to me in terms of like failure or like fear of failure is that people have an incredible sense of self, right? Like, this is, I've just shared that I almost don't allow myself to go there because of my pride. That's basically what I've just said.
Yeah,
So
ego for
if I
sure.
right, yeah, ego. So if we all like take apart our sense, our, bring deflate our egos just a little bit, we actually will probably manage to drive our careers forward even faster. There's so much in that. Like, when I think about um the beauty that comes with finding, through these alliances, through these trusted relationships, an opportunity to hear feedback, to make changes to our, the way that we work or the way that we act or the way that we do things. It's in those moments where we might not realize it, but there's some semblance of failure, and that's okay. That's not inherently a bad thing. It just means that through that feedback, we have this opportunity to make huge changes or differences in the ways that we work. And I often think about like playing sports in high school, for example, or just like growing
Yeah.
up. And I was a catcher in softball pretty much my whole life. And
Oh,
whenever
wow.
I think about failure, I know, fun fact, right? Whenever I think think about failure, I actually like I it's hard, as I've shared, it's hard for me to figure out or find something from a professional experience, but my mind always goes to my batting average in my sophomore year of high school. It was
Wow.
miserable, miserable.
Also, I mean, Tracy, you also have to look at it as when you accept the things that, you failed at, or, you didn't do so well at, that actually allows you to show up more authentically.
True.
When you can do that, when everyone on your team can do that, it becomes so beautiful, because now everyone's just showing up as they are. No one's
Totally.
hiding anything.
Totally. Where were you when I was on a sophomore in high school? It took me a whole season to realize nobody actually cares what you're like.
No.
Just do, just do what just apply your skills and don't worry about what everyone thinks and just do it. And like I don't know, it's funny because as like I've been reflecting on like growing up a lot recently, and it's like you grow up and you think that everyone is watching you and judging you and thinking about every single thing that you're doing, but actually you are your own worst critic, and
Yep,
failure is totally okay.
exactly.
Am I off base with that? Am I right? Yeah.
No, no, you're absolutely right. And well, I mean, you also have to look at it as, if you didn't fail, then you wouldn't learn and you wouldn't grow. And
Totally.
when you don't grow, you die.
Yeah, that's true. Like every other plant or living thing.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
really good
nobody
point.
cares about what award you won that day, or, or even if you did win an award and everyone's clapping for you that one day, the next day, no one cares.
That's right. Nobody cares. I don't know if you watched Schitt's Creek. It actually
Yes,
is a Canadian show, right? So you probably did.
yeah.
I'm in my like third or fourth rewatch at this point, and this phrase of like nobody cares takes me back. This is very nuanced. Takes me back to the episode of where David Rose is getting his license because he let it expire, and he's so freaked out. And Alexis is sitting in the passenger seat, and she's like, "David, nobody cares." And he's like, "What do you mean? Everybody cares." And she's like, "David, nobody cares."
Right there.
And it pans to he kicks her out of the car, and it pans to the scene where he's on the road test, and the driving instructor in the passenger seat is a DJ and would much rather be doing that because he was on his phone the whole time. And David passed his road test, and he realized nobody actually cares. And so like I realize this is like a little bit facetious, but it's something that like as we grow and as we like swallow our pride, we find more humility, we learn from one another, we practice some additional empathy in the workplace. Like this is where these are the learning moments where we realize like everyone is very concerned with themselves, and all we can do is our best and support those around us to do their best. So that's
Yes,
another Schitt's
exactly.
Creek reference for us.
So another thing I wanted to point out, Tracy, is that the happiness blueprint doesn't
Mm.
just work at work. It actually works at home too, like in
Oh,
your
I love
personal.
that.
Yeah. So
I
when
love
you
that.
think about things like inspiration, well, how do you get inspired? I mean, when you set a goal for yourself, whatever the case may be, here, January 1st is coming up, chances are somebody's going to want to lose weight. I want to lose 10
Mm-hmm.
pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you get inspired, you get sparked. You're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Now, a lot of times people fall off, and that's okay. But with a lot of our goals that are very important to us, it drives us, right? So, using the happiness blueprint in a personal capacity can really bring forth a lot of happiness.
I love that. And you know what? It's probably, I mean, I'm going out on a limb here and you can totally correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it's probably more important in some ways to get this, down to a
Absolutely.
science in some ways personally before thinking about the professional, because otherwise it's probably a little bit inauthentic, right? If we're,
Yeah.
focusing on all of these things like building trusting relationships, finding inspiration, practicing empathy, if we're not going to do those things at home and or for
Agreed.
ourselves or with the, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love something that can be applied full circle 360 without regard to whether you're at home or at work, and in some cases home is work, like for most of us, or at least you and I think home is work. And
Yes.
it's nice to know that people can kind of take this as a blueprint. I was thinking of another word, but actually blueprint is the perfect word, which is why it is called the happiness blueprint. And they can take it and apply it to their lives. So I'm curious, I know we are just about at time here, but I'm curious how you have learned from your own blueprint. Like, have you found throughout your life or throughout your experience as a professional where you kind of had to fill some gaps, or you noticed that you were kind of
Absolutely.
moving away from one of those mantras?
Yeah. So, um, people always ask me, they're like, Antoni, how many times do you go through the happiness blueprint and rate yourself? And for me, I rate myself once a quarter. So I look
Mm,
at, what am I doing with regards to like feedback? I don't solicit feedback enough, right?
mm,
Ever since I started my business, I focused less on inspiration. And there came a point where I'm like, why do I feel so blah? It's because I had no goals. I had nothing
mm,
to motivate me, right? Um,
yeah.
but where I really shined was relationships. And I've always shined in that element because relationships mean so much to me, right?
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I do it every quarter just to check on myself to see how I'm doing, where I can work on, what are the gaps, and to make me a happier person. Because if I'm happier, then I show up happier. I show up happier for my family. I show up happier
mm,
for my friends. Um, Even when I'm up on stage, I show up happier.
yeah. That's amazing.
So yeah, it's something that I love to do regularly. And
Yeah.
now that I've understood how it branches off on a personal level, I've
Right.
also launched a program for leaders so that way they can do it too. Because naturally, the if you're a leader in a company and you have, you support however many teams you support, they're looking at you to be the model. What can I get away with?
Hmm.
And if you're not showing up as your most happiest self, as your most engaged and fulfilled self, then chances are your team won't be doing the same thing.
Totally. It's really so true. There is a lot of observation that happens when
Yes.
a team is observing their, is looking at their leader. They're, you kind of are in a fishbowl, and there
Yep.
has it's like, sorry not sorry, but if you didn't know that when signing up for the job, you know it now. Everyone's
Yeah.
watching, like, just like we said before, nobody cares. Actually, when you become a leader, everybody cares. And you kind of have to uh, model all of the things that you want to see, that you need to see, that you want your team to care about. All, that's kind of the stencil for everything, is that person in that role. So that's a great point, and I love to hear that you're helping leaders specifically. I think leadership training and coaching in general tends to be not always like a first thing for companies
Right.
sometimes to look at, you know? Yeah, exactly. It's like sometimes we gotta start at the leadership level, you know, and then
Yes,
let it
exactly.
all trickle down.
Trickle down.
Um,
Yeah.
but Antoni, thank you so much for bringing some happiness and joy to the podcast this week.
You.
I totally knew this was going to be an amazing conversation, as I really believe it was. And I'd love for you to have a moment here to share with the listeners where they can connect with you, get more information on the happiness blueprint for themselves, or even work with you potentially. And everything will be in the show notes too.
Yes. So, for those of you who don't know, I live on LinkedIn. So you can always reach me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking at my DMs. If you want to connect with me, if you have any questions about inner happiness and how to foster more of it, feel free to reach out. You can also reach me on Instagram at Smiling Bowtie, or you can go old school and reach out to me on my website at smilingbowtie.com. And there you can also find information on the happiness blueprint, how you can define your happiness blueprint. I have a link there where you can download a Canva template and you can evaluate yourself. And this way you can find your gaps so that you can take action.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And you can also find my coaching there as well for if you're a leader in tech, tech specifically, just because I worked in the tech industry for 20 years. So I understand the challenges that tech leaders have. I have a coaching program for you. So if you're looking to foster more engagement and fulfillment in your role, I know a lot of leaders don't get enough training and attention that they need in order to best find what is their leadership style. I'm here for you. I got you. I got your back.
There you go.
Reach out. Yes.
I love
And
that.
for those of you who are looking for a more organizational approach, I also come in, do workshops. I also do keynotes, and it could start off as a keynote, go into a workshop, maybe some coaching afterwards. I look at it as a holistic view of how we want to foster more engagement in our workplace. It doesn't just stop at keynote speaking. It doesn't just stop at coaching, but it's like a whole gamut of different things that can be for different organizations.
Amazing stuff. I think what you're doing is fabulous, and I'm excited to continue to see all the amazing things that you do. And as I mentioned, all of those links and everywhere for the listeners to connect with you will be in the show notes. Antoni, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Traci. I appreciate you.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.